The ongoing tensions with Iran continue to mount after the United States killed Iranian General Soleimani late last week. While some have supported the action, many Democrats and Republican Senator Rand Paul are criticizing President Trump, with Senator Paul saying that this move has hurt any chances for diplomacy. For the latest developments, Carolee McGrath sat down with retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Gary Lefort and Professor Emeritus of International Business at AIC and Professor John Baick from Western New England University to get the latest.
The current crisis that we have that started in December really has been going on since probably the May timeframe of last year, 2019, where Iran kind of changed its strategy in trying to get the U.S. back into the nuclear power deal by being more confrontational. We saw the tanker attacks in May and June 2019, followed by Iran shooting down a U.S. drone at that time. The U.S. was in the process of launching a counterattack. At the last minute, decided not to, instead use other alternatives like cyber attack. But at that time, the U.S. put Iran on notice that if there were any future attacks that resulted in the loss of American lives, that there would be harsh consequences. We know that in September 2019, there was additional attacks through Iranian surrogates in Saudi Arabia as far as the oil fields go. And that brings us up to December 2019, where we're currently at, where, again, Iran-backed surrogates, Hezbollah in Iraq attacked a military base, which resulted in the loss of a U.S. contractor and injured several military people.
So talk a little bit about Soleimani in particular. He's the head of was the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, their elite force. The State Department says that he was responsible for the deaths of more than 600 U.S. troops in Iraq. Talk a little bit about what he has done.
Major General Soleimani was probably the second most powerful person in Iran, and has been responsible for most of the military actions that Iran has taken outside the country. The Quds Force was declared a terrorist organization by the U.S. back in 2007.
Talk a little bit about the politics of all of this. Obviously, there's a strong response from Democrats. Nancy Pelosi and others have said that President Trump didn't have the authorization to carry this out. Talk a little bit about their response.
I first wanted to add that Soleimani is also basically a founding father of the modern Iranian government. He is someone who was part of the revolutionary movement, someone who fought in their decade-long war against Iraq, and someone who, besides just working with proxies and irregulars, is basically the architect of Iranian foreign policy throughout the Middle East and really the world. If he has been the guiding force of Iranian foreign policy for decades, of course, American foreign policy has been much more fragmented. A lot of what we're talking about today has to do not just with contemporary politics, but it goes back to the war on terror. It goes back to that term, the axis of evil, that George Bush created. It goes back to an Iran that in 2001, on September 11th, 2001, Iranians mourned American losses. They actually had demonstrations, they had candlelight vigils. They hated al-Qaeda as much as we did. They fought al-Qaeda, they actually fought ISIS that came later. Iran was working with the United States against al-Qaeda, and then the Bush administration targeted them. Certainly, the Trump administration has been targeting Iraq, Iran in different ways, have been targeting really the Muslim world. And I really shouldn't say the Trump administration, because the complicated factor here is that the president has his own approach. He has this tactical vision, which must be very frustrating for diplomats, for soldiers who want a clear strategy, who want a guiding vision. Democrats are on their heels because, on one hand, the killing of this man, this is someone who has done harm to Americans. But by that reckoning, there are a lot of world leaders and generals who we also would want to assassinate. Assassination is a very tricky thing. And Democrats are simply trying to say that the president has done something that has destabilized the region further, and that has effectively made the United States less credible and by many measures weaker. There is a real possibility that we withdraw our forces from Iraq, which turns the last 16 years of American loss of life and blood and treasure into nothingness. And there's a real danger for every American serviceman in the Middle East that they will become a target. I don't think Iran is going to try to assassinate someone in the United States, but I wouldn't be surprised about an attack on servicemen or even tourists or students. And Democrats are trying to figure out a way. How can they say something about this? You see in Iowa that a lot of speeches pivot.
Quite a bit about it, and I will say that Jay Johnson, who's the former Homeland Security Secretary to President Obama, said on Meet the Press on Sunday that Soleimani was, quote, a lawful military objective, that the president, under his constitutional authority, had the domestic authority to take him out, even though that's being countered.
Yeah. Under American law, yes. Because as Gary pointed out, this is someone who has targeted Americans. There were definitely improvised explosive devices that were provided directly by the Iranian government that killed Americans. But by the logic of killing Soleimani, a lot of governments would want to kill Henry Kissinger for the things he did when he was a major foreign policy leader of the United States. He could have been branded a war criminal. He could have been branded a terrorist for the actions he took. It's a difference of perspective. And again, there are other leaders out there. Assassination used to be something that governments considered more openly, but in the last 50 years, there's a real concern with what assassinations mean. And when they do take place, governments usually lie about it. They never brag about it. That's what's so strange about this. The killing of Soleimani is something that has really just destabilized not just the region, but even our allies. Our allies don't know how to work with us on this one.
So, but talk a little bit about Iran is promising revenge, and I think a lot of people, and I noticed this particularly among the young people, and who are saying, "Oh gosh, you know, we're on the brink of war." Certainly, Elizabeth Warren has said the same thing, and others as well. Are we on the brink of war?
I don't know. I mean, I think you got to look at it from the perspective that certainly you would expect Iran to retaliate. But everything that I've read, the sources that I have access to, they did not expect the action that Trump took. Trump drew a red line last year when the Iranians shot down the air drone and put Iran on notice. You kill American soldiers or Americans in general, then there's going to be a consequence. And so he consequently kind of put the country, on notice. And so consequently, I don't see what happened to Soleimani as an assassination. He was a military target, the leader of a terrorist organization within Iran that had extensive global terrorist activities, especially through surrogates on a global basis. And so we took an action that we really thought was appropriate at the time. And because of that, I think Iran hopefully will take some thought that, hey, geez, America is very serious right now about the fact of military killing Americans. And so hopefully we'll take that time, especially with the death of Soleimani, because he was such an important cultural icon in the country, to look at the current situation and hopefully recognize the fact that they cannot win a war against the United States militarily.
President
and
Trump
we'll
has
take that as maybe time to say maybe it is time to sit down at the negotiating table and try to talk things through. Maybe not immediately, but in the foreseeable future.
And talk things through as far as a different nuclear deal that President Trump has talked about?
Especially as far as the nuclear power deal that they have. Because if you think about it, a lot of the friction between Iran and the United States goes back to the U.S. decision to withdraw from that deal back in 2018.
But when the U.S. did withdraw, President Trump had said, listen, this is not a good deal for the United States, which is what his reasoning was to back out. But clearly they were still sponsoring terrorists. Clearly there was a lot of money, freed assets, $150 billion, I think were the estimates that they were given. And the Trump administration said, hey, listen, they weren't abiding by it. Why should we make a deal with this country?
Well, again, from the Iranian perspective, the United States was aiding and abetting countries that were going after Iran. Iran has been trying to reset its position in the Middle East. It's trying to make itself a regional power. And in so doing, the United States is trying to blunt it. And the nuclear deal was a major step in that direction. It was also important for de-escalation. It wouldn't surprise me Iran just announced that they're withdrawing formally. The U.S. withdrew 2018, Iran withdrew yesterday. The European powers, China, Russia, they're all concerned by this. If Iran has a weapon, if they detonate a weapon in the next year, the stakes become that much higher and that much worse. At a certain point, Israel is going to become involved in all of this, and it just becomes so much more unpredictable.